cannot prevent someone from enjoying their right to life, to free speech, the freedom of thought and association. You may not impede their enjoyment of that right. I think that is what interference is.
Okay, everybody heard that? So you see then that we have mentioned some fundamental human rights. That was freedom of speech, right to life, and so on. Freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. Now, there are positive rights, which are slightly different. Positive rights require others to provide you or someone with a good or service. So an example of a positive right might be a right to education. And that would be provided by the state. You understand the distinction? So I have some rights because I'm human and they are my God-given rights. And those exist whether you believe in God or not. But then there are rights which the state can give, which are positive rights. And often those are the rights that we see coming in conflict with fundamental, basic human rights. And we'll see that as we go along a little bit more. So, if we look now at how is the rights argument being used to advance the LGBT agenda? Now, I don't know if you noticed, but there is a move in the West to, it's a kind of move of victimhood. So various people are claiming, whether it's women, transgender, transsexual, people are claiming that they are being discriminated against and they're not getting their fundamental rights. And therefore they need to fight for their rights. Now, everybody identifies with a victim, not so? We have sympathy for victims. So this victimhood is a very, very good strategy. And because if we move on, let's look at what some of the rights-based approach does. It generates sympathy for the victim. It gives sympathizers a cause to defend. And who doesn't like a cause to defend? Particularly with the LGBTQ agenda, it bypasses discussion on the nature of the activities that people are actually engaged in. Because if we considered in some detail what people were engaged in, it might not put such a nice spin on the idea of victimhood. And I won't go into that because it's a little bit upsetting. It provides legal teeth to punish opponents. So we see how the whole victim thing plays out. The other thing is that we have noticed as the rights battle is being fought that there are 4 phases. There's the request for tolerance. You know, why should somebody hate me, prevent me from getting a job, living somewhere simply because of who I am? Please tolerate who I am, accept who I am. So that tolerance then moves to the demand for acceptance. And that demand for acceptance can be by social pressure, and it can also be by legislation. So there are a lot of anti-discrimination laws. And I have a friend who works, well, let's go on to the demand for affirmation. So not only are you to accept who I am, not only, but you are now to affirm that who I am is good. So we see for the LGBT agenda, pride marches are taking place in many countries, even in Jamaica now. And in fact, a friend of mine have told me that she works at the Canadian High Commission and she tries to be absent every time they're having a pride function. But it's now becoming evident that she's doing that. So you must not only tolerate, accept, you must now affirm. Now, the final step is if you do not do all of those things, now you are to be legislated against. You are a bad person. And we will come and see some examples of that. So we see that rights, if we move on, It's a legal launching pad to prevent criticism by evoking hate speech. We see that it provides for the imposition of the LGBT lifestyle on institutions like church, schools, by the use of anti-discrimination laws. It can even be bullying. It provides a legal framework for punishing persons who seek to resist LGBT activism. And who might those people be? All of uno. Yes. So you see where it's heading if we don't bring some sanity to this. So the not so hidden outcome of the rights agenda is loss of freedom of speech, religious intolerance for those who disagree, not only Christians but others, and also the punishment for those who disagree with the LGBT agenda. I want to be clear though, that as Christians, we are ministers of reconciliation. We reject violence, but we resist uncompromisingly the LGBT agenda. Some people get confused by this. Homosexuality is not a crime in Jamaica. What is a crime in Jamaica still is robbery, and that is defined as anal penetration, which can be done with either a man or a woman. It also covers, I think I should change that word, intercourse. It also covers activity with animals. Yeah, so robbery historically is referred to as a crime against nature. And one could see why. I mean, we just have to roll back to Genesis. We just have to look at biology. So, rights and the robbery law. So what happens is that in order people who are same-sex attracted and wish to act on that attraction, wish the robbery law to be removed so they can do that what they want without it being criminalized. Now, I can hear our chairman saying he would have had no objection to that many years ago. But what we understand is that the robbery law acts as a guard to certain other things coming into place. Anybody know what makes marriage legal?
Yes.
I mean, obviously you have the legal, you sign the paper and so on. But you know, a marriage can be annulled based on what? That's correct. So, sexual intercourse consummates a marriage. And in our laws, that is defined as male. Sexual intercourse is described as only happening between a male and a female. Right? So, if we change our laws, and that is the standard of normal, if we remove our robbery law, it's saying that this unnatural act is actually natural and legal. And then you saw, and therefore, by definition, good and acceptable. So it's very important for us to keep our law. And our law, we move on, it's not about legislating righteousness. It's not about peeping into people's bedrooms. It's not about being partial to fornication versus homosexuality. Haven't you heard all of the arguments? But what it is about is fundamentally reordering our society based on the premise that sexual orientation, that is whether I like as a woman, I like as a woman, as a man, I like dogs, as a man, I like children, that's sexual orientation, that is a legitimate and deserved minority status. That it must be granted all privileges given to other groups. So, discrimination obviously is not necessarily a bad thing. We discriminate between rice and peas and bungo peas. And certain things are only available to certain people because it makes sense. For example, a 2-year-old cannot have a driver's license. That would not make any sense. Men and men cannot produce children, therefore it makes no sense that they are a married family. So when we talk about privileges given to groups, it's illogical privileges that we're talking about. It's not real discrimination. Real discrimination being, I should not be refused a job because of my color or my sex. Yeah? So that's where discrimination comes in. No. It's also what is protected by the state. Sorry. Yes, I think that, thank you, Kate, unjust discrimination. But you see, increasingly, those things are being called unjust discrimination. If I say, right, if I say marriage is between a man and a woman, I'm discriminating unjustly against people who want to marry the same sex. You see the bag of worms we are in? So that is why the Buggery law is linked so closely to the whole thing, because it's a barrier. Oh, whatever happened there? It's a barrier to the institutionalization of unnatural practices. It prevents that. It undergirds marriage legally and philosophically. It guards freedom of speech. Because one of the things that is so important that underlies Western democracies is that ideas can contend and that people who have different views can discuss these and argue about these things so we don't have to fight and kill each other. So if you lock down freedom of speech, you are really moving towards a very dangerous position in terms of giving the state totalitarian power and also giving certain groups power. You're creating power elites. So freedom of speech is absolutely essential. It also guides public officials in education and the media. So for example, it guides what is taught to our children in schools, and the toolkit goes more into that. It also allows for people who are struggling with unwanted same-sex attraction to get therapy. So you can see that it's not about a law on peeping into people's bedrooms. It's about maintaining a fundamental order of society which is in keeping with God's creation and Genesis 1 to 3. Let me see how we're doing for time. Okay. So Jamaica without the Buggery law would mean that there's no basis for challenging alternative sexual lifestyles in the educational curriculum. Gay clubs would be quite reasonable. It also means that human rights, anti-discrimination laws could be enforced if one does not endorse certain lifestyles. There would be legal sanctions for public criticisms of homosexuality. This could probably be called a hate conference, you know, or a hate seminar. And it will allow, of course, the legal adoption of children by same-sex couples has been happening elsewhere. And so what happens, regrettably, the LGBT agenda and Christianity, it is clear, cannot exist in the same public space. So as Christians, we need to say this is a better way for all people. Now, just very quickly, this gentleman is an LGBT activist, and he made the point that a middle ground might be to fight for same-sex marriage and its benefits, and then once granted, redefine the institution of marriage completely to demand the right to marry, not as a way of adhering to society's moral codes, but rather to debunk a myth and radically alter an archaic institution. So you see, the agenda is not about love and being free to love who you want. The agenda is about deconstructing society in such a way that there is sexual anarchy. And that is a terrifying thought because historically it has always led to the destruction of a particular civilization. We can witness it in Rome, you know? And so with this strategy, is there a limit to the sexual rights agenda? A few years ago in Germany, people were fighting for the right to keep bestiality. Now I find, and the German government would know, that the bestiality laws ought to be maintained. Let's move on. But look at why they said those laws should be maintained. It says the Federal Court of Germany upheld the ban, saying the protection of the well-being of animals by guarding them from unnatural sexual assault is a legitimate goal. So you understand, it did not speak about the fact that it was an unnatural act for a human being to be participating in, but it was for the protection of the animals. I think that is an absolutely good example of what it means to have a secular worldview. Because if we are not made in God's image, then anything goes. And of course, pedophiles are now wanted rights. In some countries in Europe, incest is decriminalized. And of course, we see the problem now that transgender women who are men are able to compete in some countries against women and will always win because they are men. Okay, so you see how things are unraveling at every level? Right. How are we doing for that? I'm supposed to finish at 11:30. So I can move on. Anybody need to stand up? You okay? Alright, so let's remember I said there were two strategies that were being used by the LGBT agenda. One was the right strategy, which we have just gone through, and the other one was the health strategy. And in every case, both of these strategies are aimed at removing the bubble law, which stands as a barrier to all of these things that we have spoken about. So the argument goes, if Jamaica was a tolerant society, we would get rid of our bubble laws, which would result in less discrimination and stigmatization, and would reduce HIV/AIDS in men who have sex with men. Yeah? So if you look at another view of that, if I'm a smoker and I get lung cancer, it's not because I smoke, it's because you bigoted people out there object to smoking because it's bad for my health. So you are the reason why I have cancer. Okay? Makes sense?
Not at all.
So we see that the definition of homophobia is an irrational fear, someone who is not in their right mind, someone who is suffering from a neurosis. Why do we link public health and the meaning of words? We do that because UNAIDS actually does that. So this is taken from UNAIDS, and it's an article called Measuring Homophobia to Improve the Lives of All. And that is just March of this year. It says that homophobia is defined here as any negative attitude, belief or action toward people of different sexual orientation or gender identity. So I'm a homophobe if I do not think homosexual activity is good and beneficial. I'm a homophobe. So you see how that immediately begins to shut down any kind of discussion. And that is defined by UNAIDS. Not only that, but it means that I am actually advancing the spread of the disease because of my thoughts on same-sex or other kinds of sexual activity. Let's move on. So what is the evidence to show that it is necessary? We can move on from there. What is the evidence what evidence is there to show that it is necessary to remove the Buggery law to achieve a low prevalence of HIV in men who have sex with men? Now, I think this argument, since the Jamaica Coalition of our Healthy Society has been putting ads in the paper and trying to expose the fallacy, how wrong that argument is. This argument, I think, is used less and less in the public sphere. You would agree, Doreen? Yeah. And one of the ads that we had put out, and it said, speaking the truth is not homophobia, and that removal of the Buggery law is neither necessary nor sufficient to decrease HIV prevalence in men who have sex with men. And one of the big reasons for that was that the 98% of the difference in the rates between men who have sex with men and heterosexuals can be explained by anal receptive intercourse. What do I mean by that? Men who have sex with men both give and take. So, and that's a very efficient way to spread the disease. I think I put that very delicately. Yes? Okay. Everybody understood. So, we see then okay, a phone call was coming in. Okay. So if we move on, we see that we have had by now a second challenge to our Buggery law. The first one was, I think, in 2013, and that was dropped. But Maurice Tomlinson, how could I forget the name? He is actually, there's a challenge to the constitutionality of maintaining our Buggery law, and a number of organizations, including the JCHS, are actually joining with the government to combat that challenge. Now, what is happening in the Caribbean is that countries are falling. And this article, Maurice Tomlinson is hoping that Trinidad and Tobago's ruling will actually spur the change for the laws in Jamaica. One of the things I think you might have noticed is that evil doers seem to get tired, you know. Good people seem to get very tired, but not evil. And so where is Jamaica? And Dr. Wayne West, I'm sure we'll talk about this at some other time, but we are seeing that how the laws are being changed is through the judicial system by activist judges, not only in the States, but right here in the Caribbean. Judges who have a secular worldview, who believe everything is everything, are ignoring the will of the people and pushing through these laws. So it's not about parliament, it's not about representative politics, it's not about referendum, it's about judges who have an agenda, who have been reached by the LGBT agenda people to change their minds about certain things. And in Jamaica also, we have had what is called judicial sensitization on human rights. Our judges are being influenced for evil. So, there is an agenda, and it's local. And on the same day that JCHS launched the wall, in the same location, the gay agenda was launched by J-Flag. Interesting. For Jamaica. In the same room, we were there before. So it's here and it's present. Remember a few years ago, there was no agenda, but now we actually have a pretty booklet that deals with many things, including things like culture, sports, youth, and education. So you can see where it's all headed. There is also a regional agenda. And we see that the High Court strikes down Trinidad and Tobago's sodomy or Buggery laws. The Belize High Court strikes down sodomy laws. Barbados elects a pro-LGBT female prime minister. Bermuda legalizes same-sex marriage again. So, you know, it's getting closer and closer to home. Cayman, Guyana, right.
And the thing that people must bear in mind, the same activist judges who remove those laws are going to rule against Christians if Muslims are right. So don't think that these judges are only going to function to remove the law. It's going to happen like it happens in England. If you come up against LGBT things in the future, they're going to rule against you as a Christian person. There's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's something to keep. Yeah, could you repeat that?
I'm just saying that the same activist judges who remove the Buggery laws, if you have a case in the court against some issue related to the LGBT people, they're going to rule against you in that issue as well. So don't think it's going to be only the removal of the Buggery law. It's going to be anything pertaining. In fact, there's a lady called Child Feldman in the United States, who President Obama appointed the Equal Opportunity Commission chairperson. And she said, she was a lawyer, professor of law from Georgetown University, and she made it clear that whenever LGBT issues come up against religious issues in the public square, you should come down on the side of the LGBT people. And that's been the pattern. Except, interestingly, there was a nice term in the Supreme Court recently. And also, in the UK, the second highest judge has made it clear that there will be no discrimination against LGBT people in the public square. So in terms of the law, the judges are committed to ruling against Christians and pro-LGBT. So don't think it's only going to be an abortion law. So the Christians have to be aware of that and decide how they're going to confront that. Interestingly, in the UK, the judge who made that statement at the time, when he was the second highest judge, was Lord Newberger. He has since been replaced by a man who is actually homosexual. So, like I said, don't think that the rulings against Christians are going to be confined to the Buggery law. They're going to go to everything pertaining to LGBT rights as opposed to Christian rights. Something to keep in mind as well, that the Human Rights Institute that is being formed in Jamaica is very much along that line. In the US of A, the reason why the Supreme Court overturned the decision on the baker, Jack Phillips, in the decision in the Supreme Court was because the Human Rights Commission in Colorado was so obviously biased against the Christian that the judges would decide, listen, you can't be that biased against Christian. But they did not make a ruling to say what should happen. That is still pending. Okay? So if the reality is that you can more or less say that the judicial system is going to be against Christianity in the public sphere.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, okay. What I'm going to ask you to do is to just write down your questions for the end as I run through quickly the rest of the presentation, and so that we can have it kind of holistically. I just want, so if we could move on to the next slide. We see there is an agenda and it's international. Where you see the green is where same-sex marriage is legal, okay? And there is, that international agenda meets a local agenda. Because just when was it, last year, there was something called intimate convictions, which brought Anglicans local and foreign to try and lobby against the Buggery law and to advance the cause of same-sex marriage. Well, of sexual equality. So we see that generally there are steps to get to sexual anarchy, and it's the repeal of the Buggery law, it's legal acceptance of sexual orientation, it's introducing all of those concepts into the educational system, especially using anti-bullying policies. It's punishment for people who disagree with the agenda. It's the institution of civil unions. You can marry, same-sex marriages can happen in a civil sense. There's a ban on therapy if you are same-sex attracted, leading to same-sex marriage, and what else. Because you will notice, if you have been following it, that as soon as same-sex marriage happened, the whole transgender rights thing exploded. And it's really interesting to see what is happening in Canada with that. We don't have time to look at it here. So, the final word on the Buggery law, it's an old law, but it's valuable because it teaches, it's a teacher of values, and it helps us to hold back part of the storm that is coming at us. So, very quickly, and I have another small part to go through. We have looked at the difference between a secular and a biblical worldview. We have seen how that influences public policy and our lives. We have seen how that secular agenda has played out, particularly with the LGBTQ agenda, using that word a lot. And we have seen how it is taking hold in the public square and how they have advanced it by using rights and public health. So now we come then to how that links into the wall. I always like to use, I love these things that can be the same thing that look differently. On your left, what do you see? How many people see a woman? Hands up. Woman. Okay. How many people see a musician? Okay. Some people see both. In the second one, how many people see a duck? How many people see a rabbit? Okay. And some people see both. The point I'm making here is a simple one. We can look at the same thing and see different things. Yeah? Now, whether it's a duck or a bird or a woman, it really doesn't affect. We're not going to beat each other up about that. But where it becomes problematic is when we look at Bruce Jenner, a fabulous athlete. Some people now see a woman of the year, while others would have seen a very confused and sad man. Yeah? And those people are not agreeing on who they see. And remember, when Bruce Jenner did that, he was commended by President Obama at the time for being very brave. At that was 2015, we also saw in Canada, parents were demonstrating against the kind of sex education that was happening to their children. And there were signs that said math, not masturbation, because of what little children were being taught in school. We had our own fight here with the Health Family Life module in schools. And it's back. It's not over. It's not over. So what is the link between Bruce Jenner being Woman of the Year and inappropriate sex education in school? It's worldview, and we looked at that. So countries that support Caitlyn Jenner and inappropriate sex education have secular worldviews. And we saw that no worldview, if we go on, is morally neutral. And if every man is doing according to his own way of thinking, who decides and who gets the preeminence? Now, life would be unlivable if all of us had contending views and we don't come to some consensus about what ought to be. And in a way, that's where we are, right? In many places. So we notice that this secular view, there's no right or wrong, this nihilistic view, this anarchist view, says every sexual action is right and good and nothing is abnormal. If we go down to the third point, that view has been selectively applied to the sphere of sexual intimacy. And the practical working out of that is that one view has to prevail. And Wayne had mentioned that he had mentioned Chai Feilblom saying that when there is a problem between LGBT and Christianity, LGBT wins. And that has increasingly been the question. Now, what is happening in that setting, if you look at the last sentence there, the traditional foundations for marriage and family life is being destroyed. Yeah? So we see the connection, right? Let's move on. So, from about the 40s, 50s, there has been a separation of sex from marriage and from the responsibilities of childbearing and child rearing. And this is facilitating parental immaturity, and it's raising the cost to society for the care of children resulting from irresponsible sexual unions. And Jamaica has more than its fair share of that. Pastor Bruce mentioned that in his, before he prayed earlier on, that most of our children are not born within stable family situations. So, sexual anarchy and doing as we please sexually has the worst effect on the most vulnerable, which is our children. Let's move on. We can move on. So we see that, like the walls of Jerusalem in Nehemiah's time, the foundations of marriage and family life in Caribbean societies are being broken down. And the building blocks of the walls of any nation are healthy marriages and healthy families. And strong families make a strong nation. Would you agree? Yeah? So the breakdown. So we have traced all of this with the kind of tension between secular and Christian. And we see several things happening. A 52-year-old man has gone back to being a female child. And that's fine. We see that a young man is the non-binary prom queen, and girls who objected to this were called bigots and haters. We see Evan Hempel saying, my sex is female, but my gender is male. And so, do I need, okay. Okay, so Evan, this woman who identifies as a man wanted a child, so had to come off of the male hormones in order to be able to become pregnant and feed and breastfeed the child. But since she is a man who wanted children, she doesn't breastfeed because men don't have breasts. She chest feeds. Are you confused?
No, very confused.
All right. I find this image very disturbing. Very disturbing. So at the same time, people are being fired because Crystal Dixon said gay is not the new black. Sarah, her Christian views were unacceptable in the workplace in Britain. She was fired. Oh. Okay. Did I go too fast through gay is not the new black? She wrote in a newspaper piece that she, as a black woman, cannot wake up at any time and not be a black woman because it's inherent. However, gays are claiming that the gay fight is similar to the civil rights movement for racial equality. But if you are gay, you can identify today, just as ever, as male or female or fluid. So if gender identity is fluid and is changeable and based on how I feel, how can it be inherent? Okay? So she's therefore saying, you can decide tomorrow if you are gay or not gay. I can't decide if I am black or not. Therefore, gay cannot be the new black. And in fact, it is being pushed as the new black, as a civil rights fight. Yeah? And you know, our race is inherent and sacred because it's God-given. Yeah? So, explain properly.
Yeah, I just want to add something which was important to the political process for the LGBT political movement, it was important that they said that being homosexual was inherent as race is inherent. And that argument was used initially. Somebody said there was a gay gene. Of course, there's no gay gene. The reality is that homosexuality is not inherent. If it were, if you had identical twins, they would all have the same sexual orientation. And that only applies in about 50% of cases. So that if one is homosexual, only in about 50% of cases the other would be homosexual. That makes it absolutely clear that it's not due to genetics. It's also not due to what we call prenatal factors. It is something in the environment after birth. But, you know, the whole movement is based on a lot of lies. Now that they have acquired a certain amount of political power, they are shifting from saying it's inherent to saying it's like religion, it's something that you are entitled to do. So that is going to be the argument more and more as we have to concede that it is not inherent. We're really dealing with Satanism here if you look at it carefully, because the devil is not going to come and just tell you lies like that. He's going to put those lies into various systems of thinking and have powerful institutions like universities defend those systems of thinking. This is Satanism. It goes against everything that God has put in place in Genesis.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because really our fight is not against flesh and blood, it's against principalities and powers. And those spiritual wickednesses are manifesting themselves in this way. So we're almost finished. So just to say again that Sarah was fired because her Christian views were unacceptable in the workplace. Felix was expelled from his postgraduate course at Sheffield University because he said on his private Facebook page that marriage should be between a man and a woman. So, you know, his ability to earn a living, to buy and sell, has been severely compromised. And we see Australians last year supporting same-sex marriage with great glee. We see, as we had mentioned previously, what is happening in the Caribbean with the striking down of sodomy laws. And if we move on, this is just giving an idea of the damage that the whole sexual agenda has had on our lives. Pornography, I read somewhere that children now as young as 5 are getting hooked on pornography. The whole debacle of no-fault divorce. Even in Jamaica, people are moving from common law relationships to visiting revolving relationships. No stability. And there's always human trafficking, on and on it goes. So we see that once the door is open, any number can play. So to that end came the wall, because we realized that at this particular time in history, the image of God, the family, so many things are being destroyed by the sexual agenda. Huh? Gospel. The gospel is being shut down. Yes, thank you. So that's why we are looking to rebuild the wall against the storm. So if we go very quickly to the big idea for the wall Bible study, go on, because I think we have covered that quite. Okay, so the idea is that it aims to reestablish within the church those foundations by identifying the cause of the collapse and recommending corrective action. And each module that we have in this book, that you have there, is directed at laying out a theology, a Christian worldview of sex, marriage, and the family, based on the Judeo-Christian worldview. Because, as we said, it's the best foundation for organizing society. And if we as Christians don't believe it enough to fight for it, we won't have it. And it's disappearing. So our hope is that as you go through this time, you will understand the secular atheistic philosophy and its logical outcomes for society, which is secular, nihilistic, and anarchy. You will understand and be personally transformed by the biblical theology of sex, marriage, and the family. And we'll also begin to question even how we think about things. We'll have the tools to repudiate or come against the claims of sexual rights campaigners. And we'll be able to communicate this information in a way, I think, that engage in a discussion to our friends, our family, and especially our young family who are being bombarded by all of this, you know, embedded in Disney. So as young as possible, the children are being indoctrinated. And a little bit later after lunch, Carol will go through, oh, okay. We'll go through the various modules. You can just look in your book. I won't say it. Look in your book and you can see the things that we, the modules that are there. We had already mentioned worldview. However, before I close, I want to mention let's go down to module 3, Alfred Kinsey. Because we have been talking, you can see that Carol had mentioned in Genesis that marriage, God ordained marriage between male and female. And then she went to Ephesians, where Paul had said, but I'm not talking about man, I'm talking about God and Christ and the church. And we see so much that when you attack sex, you attack much more than that. So we should be clear that the sexual act is not really only a private individual thing. How we organize our sexual lives affects our society. I would never have thought that because I had a very secular worldview. Now, what is important, in that one of the modules deals with a man called Alfred Kinsey, who was a sexual pervert and a poor researcher. And his, I can only say, nastiness continues to influence public policy, laws, education, and the minds of ordinary people about how we think about sex, including us within the church. So it's really important that the church must be able to recognize and expose his work and provide an alternative approach to human sexuality. To give you an idea, if we go to the next, yes, Carol will be going through those, so I won't go through them. If we move on, okay, we can move on, okay. Alfred Kinsey says the only unnatural sex act is that which cannot be performed. So you see, he's not a good guy. And that idea is what informs a lot of sex education in other countries. Yeah? So you can see where we go from there. Now Francis Schaeffer said, where were the Christian lawyers and professionals in the 40s and 70s when those ideas were pervading society? They weren't there to stop the flood, which is why we are where we are now. So we see quite clearly that the wall is being destroyed, and our challenge to ourselves and to all of you is what can the righteous do? And we end with Nehemiah. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. So it's a call to arms. Any questions? And any of JCS, feel free to answer.
Thank you. I certainly want to congratulate JCHS on this initiative. There's some things that are in my mind. So I mean, I thought as I've gotten older, I kind of realized that my thinking is a little bit different from those who are younger than I am. And it seems to me that we have at least 2 generations now whose thinking is kind of discontinuous when you compare the thinking with my generation. There's more flexibility in the thought processes of the generations that follow mine, and more openness than certainly I grew up with, and I still think that way. So I think it's important for the work that you're doing to continue to help to prevent the slide that I see every social media. I see what generations after me, their views are certainly more fluid than the views of people my age. And clearly there have been a lot of influences that have led to that. So the question that Chief asked had to do with, where were the Christian lawyers and professionals during the 40s, during the 1940s to the 1970s. And I'm a little worried that in the Caribbean, we see changes being made to the Boundary laws. And I don't know what the conditions or the thoughts were in the countries that take the law out before. It's long before my time. Some of the countries, the UK and Australia and the other countries were, but I can't believe that the views of the societies in the Caribbean support this kind of thought behind the removal of the Boundary laws. So it almost seems like the judiciary is acting outside of the popular will. And it is concerning because I've always understood that politicians and politicians tend to follow where the wind is blowing. And judges, when they become activists, have in the past also read their societies and read and saw openings for laws which would enjoy favor amongst the population. But what these judges are doing in the Caribbean, they are moving faster than the population, which seems to be something new and different. So in Australia, the population was ready for gay marriage. In Ireland, the population wasn't ready for gay marriage, but in terms of majorities. The striking down of the Boundary law enjoys minority support in the Caribbean, yet the laws are being taken out. So what then do we do? How do we leverage the wall that the majority represents to stop the slide that we are seeing in Caribbean jurisprudence?
Great question. Dr. West.
We've been thinking about that. Can you hear me?
No, you have to go to them.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Just before Dr. West responds, just to answer that the Boundary law was repealed in the UK in 1967 after a 10-year debate in Parliament, which was spurred on by a committee report led by Lord Ruthven, looking at whether the Boundary law should be retained and also laws against prostitution. And the committee was really concerned about how to help the homosexuals. They were not thinking about gay marriage or the implications. They were only moving out of what they thought was a compassionate response to men who have same-sex attraction, and that jail was not the best therapy. So they were not thinking about normalizing it, but they didn't see the long-term consequences. So many churches, including the Church of England, was in favor of repealing the Boundary law because they wanted a compassionate response to help the homosexual. And interestingly, now that same-sex marriage has been made legal in the UK, the Church of England had to seek an exemption in order to be protected from the consequences of that law and not be forced to perform same-sex marriage. But in 1957, that was not their intention, but to help the homosexual.
Hi, good morning. Congrats again to JCHS for putting on this excellent workshop. Just very quickly, I think in response to what Pastor Michael has said about what do we do, one of the very, very first things we can make sure we do is to not sit on the information that has been shared here. This is a training workshop. Once you're here, you have now been given the tools and the mandate to go out into your respective spheres of influence and share what you have learned. Because there's no way we can expect to rebuild a wall or gather up enough support for rebuilding a wall if we keep all of this information to ourselves. So as we go through the rest of the day, please don't just listen to learn, listen to learn to be able to teach other people later.
Okay. In all human activities, there are always a complex of factors. So in saying what you need to do, you need to understand the complex factors that are playing. There's not just one thing happens and it causes that effect. No, it tends to be a number of things happening that cause effect. So, just as the church in England, the English people sought to help the homosexuals by removing the Bubbly Law in the Wolfenden, I think that, yes, committee. The gay rights movement started in the United States in the context of the protests against the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, that ferment of moving forward. And so it started as a rights movement. Now the problem, like I say, homosexuality is not normal. It is absolutely not normal. It's not normal philosophically, nor is it normal in terms of its mental and physical, medical consequences. But it was started as the gay rights movement. The thing is, a number of factors have evolved to move it from the gay rights movement to the LGBT plus political movement. All right? So, for example, the black civil rights movement never started indoctrinating people into being black. Are you with me? But the LGBT political movement is indoctrinating children into being nihilistic and anarchists, using comprehensive sexuality education. So it's no longer it was a civil rights movement based on a false premise, but it has moved beyond being a civil rights movement to being a political movement. It is a cultural Marxist political movement. What do I mean by that? If you know anything about Karl Marx did an analysis of society which was pervasive and which lasted a long time and which almost a third of the world followed. That in terms of economics, you have oppressor and you have oppressed. The oppressor is the bourgeoisie. My wife said I don't pronounce this product well. The bourgeoisie or something so. And the oppressed are the proletariat. So that's in terms of economics. Well, the left-wing people in the universities have taken Marxism out of economics because that has proven to be an utter disaster. Communism and economic Marxism is a disaster, but the universities are still committed to Marxism, but now, not in terms of economic analysis, but in terms of cultural analysis. So it means that you look at the way society is organized. So you have what they call sexual minorities. So the sexual minority would be the homosexual, the pansexual, the zoophile, all these things. They are sexual minorities. And you have the church, which says that God made human beings to be heterosexual. So we are now the oppressor of the sexual minority. And so feminism and all these things, all this way of analyzing the society in terms of oppressor and oppressed, it bypasses any discussion on what is actually being done. So you don't discuss what the homosexuals do. They are just an oppressed minority. And so you have a term called social justice warriors. These are people who are coming to get justice for all oppressed groups. And in Western society, the oppressed groups could be the Muslim. That's why you would not hear the left-wing people criticize Muslims, because in Western societies, Muslims are an oppressed minority. So, so just to go back, what has happened in terms of analysis of the society is you have a cultural Marxist approach to analysis of oppressor and oppressed, and the judges are legislating that. Are you with me? So we have now moved from a civil rights movement into a political movement, but you're having judges legislating a political movement. We have to bring that to a stop here. And the way we do it is by letting people know that judges have no place in politics. This is not a civil rights concept. They have constructed all these rights in order to advance their politics. And they are imposing their politics with the help of the judges and us. So if the judges choose to be part of the political process, then they become targets of politics. Isn't that so? At the moment, we give them deference. At the moment, we give them deference because we assume that they are independent adjudicators who are looking at facts and coming up, but they are not. The two rulings in the Caribbean show that they are not doing that. So if they are going to be political, we're going to take them on as political people too. We're going to put them in the public square and we will deal with them the same way we deal with politicians. Isn't that so? So that's what we're going to do.
Just to mention that the acronym MSM, which public health officials use to describe homosexuals, men and sex with men, MSM, that's a false terminology. Men cannot have sex with men. Sex is sexual intercourse between male and female. So feel free to correct that term when you speak. It's not men or sex with men. Men sodomize men. That's what the public health officials want to say, men or sex with men, but we want to correct that fallacy. MSM means men sodomize men. It's part of bringing the truth back to India.
Good point.
Question, to what extent has the movement towards the LGBT agenda been affected by economics, both at the individual level and at the national level? Because I think you can follow people's decision making is affected by economics. So people move into this thing for the economics. To what extent does that dovetail? And have we researched it?
Doreen, you want to take that? No? No, I thought it would be nice to hear another voice except mine.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't think much research is necessary. You can all just look in the mirror because whenever you take a public stand on these issues, it's going to affect your livelihood. And it's clear. And there are many people, there are some pastors who have said they will not stand publicly with us because they do not want to lose their visas. But there are others who have said they don't want any animosity, they don't want any negative vibes. There are people we know personally who do not want their jobs or their promotions affected. So the research, you can just look around you, and we all, at least speaking for my husband and myself, we have not been immune from the economic effects of job and promotion because of standing publicly for this matter. That's at the personal level. Then at the national level, we know for a fact that when Canada gives Jamaica money to support its health budget, along with that money are a set of conditionalities. We know that when Canada gives money for judges to be trained, as they have done, we know that in that training are a lot of sensitization things about what should be said and what shouldn't be said. We recently had a complaint from a pastor who went to be trained, I think, as a dispute resolution person in public square. And he was told in no uncertain means that homophobic people should not be welcome for that training. So I don't think much research is necessary. You just have to use your eyes and look around you, and it is obvious. And if you want to test it out, you go test it out. Go in your workplace, or go in the public square and say, I am so and so, I work at such and such a bank, and I do not believe that a transgender man is a real man. I do not believe the Bugger law should be repealed. You go in public and say it, and see how soon it will be before someone of your superiors writes you a letter. We have a pastor who was a JP, Seventh-day Adventist pastor who was a JP, who preached about biblical sexuality and marriage in his church, and was called up and told that if he did it again, he would no longer be a JP. This is in Jamaica, in Mevo. And he gave the appropriate answer. He said, you can keep your JP, and I will preach what I want to preach in church. So you don't need a lot of research to ask if this matters.
And just to follow on quickly from what, and there's one here and there.
I just want to say that the secular people that are pushing this agenda have a lot of money. So, in terms of economics, the UN and Canada, the organizations who are pushing this agenda have much more money than Christianity.
Well, they are using much more
They're
money.
using a
I don't know
lot
if they
of
have
money, and
more.
they get the youth to pay money, and so it's an economic thing for sure, because those agencies have a lot of money.
There was
Access to a lot of money.
I think there's one here and venue. No, I think that lady, and then, okay.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
And, I really must add my own thanks to the organizers of this and the preparation of all this. But, when I think about the question that Pastor Mike just asked about what do we do now, I think it's very obvious to me that this is not just a battle in what we see. It's a spiritual battle. It's definitely a spiritual battle. And you know what Nehemiah did? The word says he fasted for days. When he sought the Lord about the condition of the walls. And I really think that our best defense right now is for the churches who are involved or who are interested, is to strategize a fast. A fast that continues. Maybe one church does it for 7 days, followed by another church for 7 days, followed by other churches, and we keep this going. And we seek the Lord's strategies. His strategies are certainly going to be better than what the enemy has planned, and the enemy has been planning this for years. We're just waking up to this fact. But I don't believe that our answer lies only in educating and bringing people to an awareness of the situation. There has to be a God-given strategy for dealing with this. And I believe fasting has to be a part of the plan. All right?
Thank you. Who is next? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
First of all, thanks for this. As usual, I arrived kicking and screaming, but my husband insisted that I'm supposed to be here, therefore I'm here. But I'm glad I'm here. But I've been pondering, just listening to what is being said, I'm pondering. And the whole business of the worldview, the changing of your worldview or establishing your worldview as a biblical worldview is something that I think that I hear Paulette with the prayer and so on, I agree with that, and the fasting. But there's also work that has to be done. And my question is where? And I'm feeling that there are our young people, and I don't even mean young at university. I'm a vice principal in a high school, so I'm talking younger than that. Their worldview is quietly changing. They're not really our focus. When I say I mean people in general. We tend to think of them as children, so maybe when they get older, we start talking to them about things. But their worldview is quietly, gently, just changing. And it's not necessarily changing because of a curriculum, it is changing because of what they are watching and their social media interactions. I look back at how many years of teaching, and I can have people today come into the principal's office and tell us whether they are bi, or they are gay, or they are whatever it is. Now, I'm not saying gays didn't exist in our time, but definitely you would not be telling the principal that the views are changing, and it's changing quietly. The whole business of what's happening in the family is happening there. In another 20 years, we're going to look and not recognize our country because those same children, 14, 15, 16 growing up, will be the adults and the leaders of the country. Somewhere there, something has to happen. I'm just sitting down trying to map out in my mind. Because what hasn't changed is that is still the age where they are trying to decide what they believe. It is still the age where they are trying to say, who am I? Where am I going? Where am I going to be? But we as the church is not really a very strong influencer anymore. When you ask people, every time we have an issue in the office, we ask, when you go to church. And what we are finding is that we have two generations of non-church goers. We talk about the gospel is heard, there are people who have never heard the gospel right here because the children don't go and their parents don't go. The last person who took somebody to church was the grandmother. This is just real, and it is like every day you go through this. So I'm saying to myself that I appreciate this session because you have to start thinking, how am I going to engage our children as they are trying to decide what they believe by what is real versus what is not real. And trust me, they're just changing, quietly, gently changing from what we call traditional views to what is now very, very secular and very, whatever is happening in North America, Europe, etc. Those are just my musings.
Okay, just two quick comments. I think part of the big biblical worldview is that we recognize that prayer and fasting must be a part of our strategy. So I'm just saying that is part of the worldview. But I think people have to know what is going on to be properly informed as how to deal with it. If we don't know there's a battle, we can't fight it. So those things go together. The other thing is with regard to that last comment, we have recognized that we also need to start very early with the children with worldview curriculum, and that has been one of the things we have been trying to actually get into our church. So I think there are several responsibilities for the church to understand, for the children that they still have in church, to educate them so that they can face what is coming. And that needs to be done deliberately and strategically. The other thing is, I think that, you know, a lot of our schools are still church schools. Now, I don't know how that works practically with the Ministry of Education, but there is an opportunity as well to introduce Christian worldview into Christian schools. So I think there are things there that are kind of, it's almost low-hanging fruit that we are simply not doing. So it brings back to people are supposed to be seeing opportunity for repairing the wall at all kinds of levels. Yeah. I don't know if we're at a time where we should break now, or there's an opportunity for one more comment or question. Oh, okay, so we can go on talking while they say. Sorry.
I have the same deep concern as what's her name? Ava, for the children, because apart from everything else, she was talking about it quietly and gently being done. It's not even quietly and gently, it's not a complete overt attempt to indoctrinate our children. Comprehensive sexuality, which is the HFLE curriculum, is very much a huge part of that agenda. So, you know, when they're asking children questions like, yes, how do you know you're not gay? Having them to sit down and think about themselves as gay and ask themselves questions. When last did you have sex? Anal sex. That's how they put the question in. When last did you have anal sex? Now, we managed to go on a committee and have quite a bit of it taken off, but still, they're sticking in sexual orientation in there as if it's a normal thing. You need to, at the back of the book, there's things about words that have changed so that children think differently. Like sexual reproductive health is just another way of talking about abortion. That's true. That's exactly how it is. You check it out. That sexual reproductive rights are really rights to have abortion. Yeah. So this is all at the back of the book. What we call the way they change newspeak, they change the language so that they can get things across. But I'm very concerned about the children, as all of us should be, and getting the youth involved in this, because you see this agenda, they're not interested in over 30 people. They're under 30 people, right? So when we did a book like this, it is not because we didn't pray, it's not because we didn't fast, and that's a huge part of it, but we have to act as well. And what happened there? And so the thing is, one of the things is everybody's building their part of the wall. So your part of the wall is not just a group of people you have. You can have a young people's group, 15-year-olds can do this. You can, 15 up is what this book is based at. And also, you are to influence wherever you are. So when you have this material, you use it with the people that you can have discussions with. That's the whole point of it. And then our plan, I believe, was to do something in terms of worldview for the younger children. But this is everybody on the wall influencing wherever they can. You understand? So you can have groups with younger people, not below 15 for this particular one, but 15 and up.
Carol, please mention that even now, JFJ is having a meeting.
Oh.
Now about the comprehensive sexual
Yes.
education. Oh, yes.
Having I don't know how to miss having put up that fight from. Let me go back there.
Hello?
Oh.
Having done the health and family life education curriculum and fought against it, GCHS was very much a part of that. Every year they come back. Every year JFLAG comes back. Every year they come back trying to put more and more stuff. Right now, there's a new push again. And what they said, Kate, it's a...
I'm meeting just this Thursday.
You want to speak on this?
This Thursday, they're having a meeting to try and put back the stuff back into the comprehensive. When you hear health and family life education, think comprehensive sexuality education. It's the same thing. Children's what?
Children's forum.
A children's forum, you come and tell them about it. And PANCAP, when you hear PANCAP, think the same thing. It's all about indoctrinating our children. They're not interested in us, in it. So any young person who is here, you are vital to this battle.
Absolutely.
Vital, you can't just sit down. It's do is we'll be all dead and gone and you'll be the ones in it. So.
There was a question at the back.
It's
Pastor, was there another question?
Here's the thing, the United Nations Children's Fund, that's UNICEF, which is no longer an innocent organization looking out for children. It has been totally hijacked. Jamaicans for Justice and the Caribbean Policy Research Institute invite you to a forum on safety and justice for Jamaican children. Briefing and discussion on UNICEF's newest situation analysis of children conducted by the Caribbean Policy Research Institute. Preliminary findings and launch of a new research initiative on children in state care by Jamaicans for Justice. Do you remember that Jamaicans for Justice were the ones that were putting in the comprehensive sexuality education into the state homes, and they were exposed. It was shut down. Carrying goals had to be removed, and yet it has come right back. The most vulnerable children, to tell them that things like abortion and buggery and homosexuality, all these things are good and natural and normal. That's what they're doing.
Thank you. So the only comment I have to make, I want just to follow up on something that Dr. West Wayne shared earlier on the judges. I think it's important for JCHS to ask itself, what are some of the ways we're going to challenge the way the justice system works on the matter? I don't have any ideas. I read something recently and I don't remember what the issue was, but the judge made a decision in the United States that the majority of the people didn't like the decision. And at the time, the way that particular town operated, or county, the judge had to actually go for re-election, and the people voted the judge out. So, I'm not saying that we need to start voting for judges in Jamaica, because that has its own fair share of consequences. But this idea of having one single judge sitting in a room who had a bad night last night, making an important decision. I've seen in Jamaica where I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen Jamaica where they've said some things have to be heard by a panel of judges, can no longer be heard by one judge. I don't know what the issue was. So I'm just saying, maybe an opportunity here for us, knowing what has been happening with a single judge who has an activist position. Maybe we need to challenge the way decisions are made and how the court has to be constituted. That is going to require some research, I suppose, and the lawyers that are in the group to perhaps think about, what are the proposals that we feel are necessary to protect the country from single activist judges on any matter, whether it has to do with homosexuality or sexual education, or abortion. There may be other issues that are not before us today, that the same kind of activism from a single judge could take the country to where we don't want it to get to.
Thank you.
Isn't it that in Jamaica, we usually have a panel, a panel of judges who normally make decisions, but with this new review that they've had through Canada, that they're now moving towards having single judges. And in fact, we have been ranting and protesting about it, because if it is new move, which is a Canadian thing, and in fact we are very afraid of it, that it is with this now that they're thinking that the homosexual agenda will get along a bit too fast, and that in fact sorry, go to the man.
Yeah. Should we take one more and then we'll say grace or not?
But we could encourage somebody to go to that forum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In fact, if I'm correct, I was hoping that Shirley might be here to help me.
Yeah.
But I think, and sometimes I read a lot, and I don't quite, but I think I'm right in this. That there is a concern that we are moving towards having a single judge making judgments on issues in Jamaica. And in fact, it is our usual practice to have more than one judge. And that there's safety in having more than one judge do so. And that we prefer to have more than one judge. But with the reform, that has come through Canada.
Yeah, the judicial reform.
The judicial reform that we are moving towards one judge. And in fact, we should write letters and call up the talk show host and say we do not want this reform with only one judge. We prefer to have more than one judge and see if we can have some change, prevent that from happening in our country.
Thanks, Dave. Are you going to come to the mic?
Well, I'm no authority, but
just do.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It was reported in the newspaper last week or the week before that with the new justice reform program, which is being underpinned by Canada, that because of the backlog of cases, that there are certain things that they're trying to shift to one judge ruling instead of the panels. And maybe the attorneys here might want to speak to the fact that the lower courts are one judge, but it's at the Supreme Court that you get the panel of judges, which is like 3 judges. And so I'm not sure that it has reached there yet, but you see the progress coming with the Canadian Justice Reform Program. And so the idea is watch it and write about it and object to it.
And be in Parliament when we make the call. I think we could stop there. Yeah? You want to come and say? And then after her, you have a question?
It would be very nice if, remember this is not a JCHS business, this is a business of all of us. So the forum that we had with them inviting, talking about the children, the state of the children in the Caribbean, it would be really wonderful if somebody would go to that forum. You can get the information from Philip or from Kay. And just get the information of what they're saying, because we are a small group. This is everybody's problem. So please, somebody volunteer to go to that forum and get the information from people.
You could say who you are. We should have been doing this from before.
Okay, hi everybody. So what I'm saying is, it's not as high as in regards to what you guys have been speaking about. I've just been thinking, like, how does this apply to me, a 20-year-old who grows up in the generation of the persons who are unchurched and, you know, they don't believe in church, you know, and then slightly kind of angry towards church. But when I was thinking about it, I thought about Stephen when he was being stoned for what he said, and I was just thinking about his disposition in regards to, it says that his face was like that of an angel, and I was just thinking that in regards to the conversation that needs to be had with, you know, the persons who are upholding LGBT, or, you know, other persons who do other things, because it's not just that. But I was thinking that in regards to how us, the church, should be relating to these persons, is that there's such a way to bring across truth where your angelic, Christ-like disposition, like 1 Corinthians 13 talks about love, and without it you're a clanging cymbal and a gong. And I believe that believers, you know, and the wider society does really listen to the church on these matters. And why people my age would really just dismiss what the church is doing, you know, they're just like, you know, church just enough, etc., etc. But I really believe that if, say, just on a daily basis in how to communicate with persons, that, you know, we're open to persecution. You know, it says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, which is doing what is right. And it's that openness to persecution, you know, even while, say, 10 homosexuals might be persecuting you for what you are saying, there might be one that might say that, you know, there's something different about how this person is carrying across truth and the things which they are saying, and I need to find or know what it is, or the truth behind what it is that they are saying. So it's, I guess, two things: being open to the persecution, not being scared of it, because I find that when we're scared of it, we might get a bit, you know, defensive and tense, and, you know, we want to basically push something which indeed is right, so that, yeah, we want to push something that really is true, you know, but to be open to the fact that, you know, yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks a lot for that comment, because I think it brings up an important point which we haven't really looked at, is that we now have to evangelize in a way that we have not had to do in Jamaica, which has been very sympathetic to the gospel. So we now have a generation or generations that don't know Christ. So what I hear you talking about is evangelism, but evangelism in a different way. Yeah? Because the times are changing. No, yes, it is. No, yes, and I said that before.
As I said before, in life, things are never just one-to-one. There tend to be many factors that come into play at the same time. So we are looking at individuals, and we need to evangelize individuals, and we need to be sympathetic. But we have to understand clearly that we are in a political moment. There's politics as well. There's evangelism and there is politics. So I don't think Christians are obligated to do evangelism all the time.
That's correct.
As citizens of the country, we are expected, I think, to be salt and light. And salt and light is to share our ideas, because the weapons of our warfare are not of this world. But they are ideas, because what the devil has is wrong ideas. This is where worldview comes in. What are the ideas that are being used, and what are God's ideas? So we are in not simply an evangelistic moment, which we always are, and always will be, but we are in a political moment. And we need to know how we're going to respond to that political moment to be effective. I show you the difference between evangelism and politics. You know, when David went up against Goliath, it was a very political moment. And meaning that he didn't go singing songs to Goliath. Yeah, because he was dealing with a particular problem. So you have to be able to identify the problem and act appropriately in each scenario. There is a time for everything.
Okay, so we have one more. Yeah. And then we'll say grace. Yes.
It comes to mind as we're thinking about all of this and thinking about the youth, young adults at this time, that there is this generational purpose. I think we're in such a kairos moment. There's a generational purpose. I think of the crowd of witnesses that are watching to see what this generation face with these particular situations that we are picked to be in the earth at this time, to actually be an answer and to be a light at this time. And I think we have to, the younger generation has to know who they are, where we are in time, and not get caught up in civilian affairs. Some things that are happening that wants us to, like, think of the church, oh, you know, is this one against that one? And so we get into little pity-patty things in the church when the enemy is strategically trying to break us down and break us apart. What, as young persons, it's crucial for you to know, I carry the light, I carry the truth, and be in a position where you do carry it because you know God. As was stated in the Barna research, that the breaking away from the church, the youth leaving the church, those who have an intimate relationship with God are the ones who stay. So for us, the church, we have to find out, how do I connect them to God? And how do I connect them to this truth? A lot of young people that we're around now are clueless. One person asked me, you guys always say, vote the Bible. I don't have a clue what that means. And so these conversations are really necessary. That we don't say, oh, those are old people, and these are young people, and there's this big separation. We have to bridge the gap and start talking in a way that they can understand. And it's not, oh, they're speaking French and we speak English.
Okay. Thank you.
One final comment.
Some young people want to talk. Okay, so are there any people who have been silent who feel that they're on the third? Who want to talk? Okay.
One final.
Go ahead.
As I listen to what was going on here, I am really impressed, and I really support what is going on here. Now, one of the things that I sense that is happening with our church and our whole is that we see things. Trying to say it now, we spiritualize things and we just spirit alone. And while I know that we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, that is very clear. But you see, like how, for example, Doc just mentioned the whole idea of David going up against Goliath was not just a spiritual thing, but it had a political thing. I feel that when we read the scriptures and when we see ourselves as Christians in the scriptures, we don't see ourselves as doing these things that are quote unquote are not. We don't see them as spiritual things. So things like politics and all those things, we don't look at it. But when we look at even how when Daniel and those men were taken into Babylon, it was a reculturing, it was a reshaping of everything. So I feel that as a church, we need to kind of get out of the mindset that why it's just quote unquote spiritual things alone. And I'm saying this very minded now, spiritual things alone that we should engage in, because the Lord has called us and He has placed us in strategic places. He has given us certain education. We have gone through certain amount of training, and we're now expected to use those to combat what the enemy is doing. And if we just sit and just see it as just a spiritual thing, and so it's just a quote unquote spiritual thing alone, then we're gonna lose. That's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah, spiritual covers many things.
Just to put a practical note on what the brother just said. Let us ask ourselves this question. Yes, we pray and we fast. How many of us are registered to vote?
You want a show of hands?
It's a rhetorical question. Ask yourself that. How many of us are involved with the school PTA? How many of us are involved with our social programs? So that when someone comes up with a question that pushes something that is not representing our worldview, we can counter it. That's what we're talking about. Being practical, going out there and representing the word of God and our worldview.
Yeah. There were childhoods and visions that fed real people. One more, and then we pray if there is one more burning question. Okay.
I'll do one more.
You are the one more.
Right. I just want to agree with what was said just now, but I also want to commend the whole presentation and those who are involved in this. What I wanted to really highlight was the fact that the two views are not mutually exclusive. We are called to pray, and if anybody knows about me, know that prayer is the focus of my ministry and life. But there is a critical role that we must play and things that we must do to fulfill God's purpose. There is work that we have to do even as we pray. But I really want to emphasize the fact that the heart and attitude of the people who are involved is very, very important. David was able to defeat Goliath because of his relationship with God. He approached Goliath with his 5 stones and his sling, but in the midst of all of that, he was prophesying. In other words, there's a prophetic role. He said, you come to me with a sword and a shield and all of that, but I come to you in the name of the Lord God of hosts. And today, I'm going to cut off your head. Right? I'm going to kill you, cut off your head, and feed it to the beast. Now, we need to be aware of our prophetic role and the things that we need to do on that level. But we need to be also very, very open to God and to be able to hear his voice so that we can do what he tells us to do when we need to do it. And it includes what we're doing here today. So I really want to commend the brethren for doing this. And we will continue to pray and fast.
And may I suggest that Pastor Harry is our prayer support and also one of those who came out and protested with us.
Yes.
So he did both.
Yeah. Carry the placard and stand in front of the American Embassy. But the prayer room was just around the road. We went back to the prayer room and we continued to pray and fast and to trust God. Amen. So Father, we just thank you again for today and for the work of your Spirit in our lives. Father, we pray that you will continue to give us the kind of insight and the understanding that we need to fulfill your purpose in these days. Lord, we pray that the strength revealed to us in Christ and given to us by the grace of God, that we'll be able to operate in and fulfill your purpose. Lord, we want to honor you by giving you the praise that you deserve. Lord, to give you worship, because the things we do are activated in this place of prayer and worship. So Lord, strengthen our resolve, help us to fulfill your purpose. And today, Lord, even as we break now for lunch, we pray that you would bless the food that has been prepared and that it will be a blessing to us. In the name of Jesus, amen.